You're listening to the Sensuality Project podcast, where the messiness of real life gets sexy, hosted by Stacey Herrera. This podcast is intended for mature audiences only. Episodes contain profane language and topics of a sexual nature that may not be suitable for children. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Welcome to another episode of the Sensuality Project podcast. I am your host, Stacey Herrera. It's been a minute. I think the last episode that I posted was in July. Can I just tell you that 2018 has been nothing? It's been nothing like I expected. So things have taken some twists and turns. Some of it good, some of it not so good, but it's all good, right? Anyway, so I am back though, and I've said this a few times, but like for real this time. I'm back. I've got some really great conversations lined up for you, and this one is no exception. In fact, this one is a very exceptional conversation. I'm chatting this week with Jenny Berk, and I cannot even tell you, how sometimes you meet someone and you've never had a conversation before, but it is like you've never not known one another. And that's what my chat was like with Jenny. She is just amazing. The work that she does, helping people to really become intimate with food, is astounding. We just talked about so many juicy things. We talked about motherhood. Of course, we talked about food. We talked about sex. We just talked about a lot of real life stuff. So this is a super relatable episode. You are really, really going to enjoy it. So I'm going to be quiet so that you can listen up. One of the things that I noticed, and I don't know if I was as aware of it when my daughter was younger, because I was fortunate enough to raise a child before the internet. Like when we got our first computer, I think in 1996, and there was no www yet, there was no such thing. There was no such thing. Of course, there was no social media whatsoever. So I have no concept of what it looks like to like raise a child with all of this distracting noise all the time. But one of the things that I do know that moms are the most judged people on the planet.
That's totally true. Yes.
Nobody is judged more harshly than a mother. And because that judgment, it does not matter about race. It has no concept of nationality.
Right.
Mothers are judged so critically about everything.
True. Yeah. And you can't escape it. It's like everything we do or don't do is scrutinized so much that, sometimes it actually like stops us in our tracks. So we don't know what to do. We can't even like use our intuition because we're fearful of being judged for everything we do.
It's a thing. I mean, and I can't say that I never judge moms. Like, let me tell you the mom that I judge the most frequently. Like when I'm out someplace and it feels chilly to me and I see a mom with a baby that has no hat and no socks on, I'm always thinking, what the hell is wrong with her?
She's freezing. Yeah.
But I mean, then I think like, I don't know what her life is, and I don't know if her baby runs hot. You know what I mean? But in my mind, like, why doesn't that baby have socks on? It's cold in here, or we're on the freezer aisle in the grocery store, and here's this baby with like that. But so I'm cognizant of it, but like sometimes I've already started the judgment ball rolling before I realize I'm doing it.
It's so funny that you say that because I was that mom who I would wrap, put her in a onesie and like get in the stroller. And then I'd be like, oh no, I forgot socks. And my husband would be like, what are you doing? Like, she's going to be freezing. And like, I was like, oh yeah, I was like that disorganized mom who was always like, oh my gosh, diaper bag. Oh my gosh. Like I forgot food. Like, okay, whatever, so, but I totally relate to that because everybody has their own thing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I know like my older sister was that mom. Like it didn't come natural to her, like at all. Like she just was like, whatever's in the bag the last time is what's in the bag this time, but I think we also had like my mother is a Virgo. I mean, so ridiculously anal about everything. Like I'm one of three, and she didn't want us to play outside because she didn't want us to get dirty. So like, I think I wasn't as extreme as my mother, but I would, when it came to like, I stopped carrying a bag for my daughter when she was like 8.
Oh, wow.
It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
It was
Wow.
ridiculous. Like it was ridiculous. Like I sterilized bottles the whole time. Like even when my daughter got to, like, we were done with bottles by the time she was like 10 months, but the whole time she was actually drinking one, I sterilized them every day.
Wow.
Because
That's amazing.
because I thought that that's what it was supposed to look like. Because that's who my mother was. Whereas my older sister really rebelled against anything that looked like what my mother would do.
Yeah. So like, I'm totally resonating with that as you're talking, because my mom was like a total neatnik and like would gather all my stuff in the room and like put it in front of my door as like this passive aggressive, like, you didn't clean up and I like my house a certain way. And I think maybe my whole thing was just, I wasn't conscious, but like maybe it was sort of a rebellion of that. Like my biggest fail was, I remember I went back to my job just to visit with my baby, and she made like the biggest poop like ever. And I didn't have a diaper. And I like took an extra onesie and I like put it in. And I was like, I like quickly head home because I was the mom who didn't bring a diaper. And someone even said like, what mom doesn't bring a diaper and a diaper bag? And I was like, oh man, terrible.
But it's one of those things, like, even no matter what your own mom was like, there still is no manual.
Right.
You know, you can read I remember like overdosing on Parenting Magazine because, again, there was no internet for me to Google anything. So I read Parenting Magazine like a lunatic. And I remember like being so... Like my grandmother once asked me, and it was probably the biggest compliment, and now like almost cringeworthy now that I'm thinking about it. But I remember my grandmother asking me, how did I get so good at being a mom? And the reason it makes me cringe now, at the time I was like, wow, am I good at being a mom? But you know, like now that I'm on the other side, because my daughter's a grown up, I think like that could have been really terrible in the presence of somebody who felt like they weren't winning. And not that I felt like I was winning at being a mom. I felt like I was failing every day, you know, and because I only had one daughter and because she was easy up until age 11. So
good for you.
That was one of my fears about having another one, by the way, that I was like, yeah, I'm going to fuck around and have a kid that hates me and that's going to be having tantrums and doing crazy shit. Because my daughter was so not like that. But
you didn't want to take the chance.
I was worried that I was like, this was way too... I mean, when I tell you, my daughter slept all night at 1 month.
What?
Yes, all night at 1 month. Once she was able to sit up by herself, I started giving her cups with like, sippy cups with her meals. So getting rid of the bottle was so easy. Like, it was just like, I just packed extra cups when we go someplace. And then I started sitting her on the potty when she was like 9 months, because my mother told me, and it probably was a fabrication, but my mother told me that we were potty trained by 1 year. So I thought I was failing big time when my daughter wasn't. I don't know if that's actually true, if that's just what her memory said. But I was thinking when my daughter got to 1 and wasn't doing it, I was like, how is this possible? Like, my mother said that, but my daughter, like before she was 18 months, she was potty trained, because once I realized that she liked washing her hands, I used that as bribery. That if you pee in here, you can wash your hands by yourself. And after that, she never wore a diaper again.
Wow.
So like everything was easy. And I know if I had had a second child, I would be telling you a very different story right now.
Right. Because they're always totally the opposite.
Exactly.
Or totally different. But like, it's so interesting, like what you're bringing up, the judgment is often like, yes, we're judged by other people, but we also judge ourselves based on the context that we have. So like my context was to potty train by 3. So like, where you felt like, oh my gosh, like she's almost 1 and she's not potty trained. You saw that as a failure. Like I would have been like, oh, I got 2 years. I don't have to worry about this.
Right.
And that can be true with like breastfeeding. It can be true with like anything. Like it's all the context and like how you were brought up and what you see, and then comparing yourself to that. And I think that's the problem, where people then just start to feel bad about their own choices and judgments.
Absolutely. And we feel it as women. I mean, and not to say that men don't feel it. Of course, I have no concept of what that looks like. But as women, I know that is a thing. As a mother, it's like a whole nother layer. And when your kid does anything, anything, like when you watch like news headlines of like these grown people who do heinous things, the parents still get really crucified. Even if the kid is like, if the kid commits some mass, murder situation and they're 30, people are still thinking about what the parents must have been like. Particularly where was the mother? Didn't they see the signs? And so it never goes away.
No, it's true. It's like that, the Sandy Hook one, the mom got a lot on that one, because he was even like, I think he like threatened her. Like she thought he was going to kill her,
It's really, being a mother is the most vulnerable, on so many levels. I mean, it's vulnerable just to be responsible for another life, period, is a lot. But then like to have that on top of what everybody else is saying.
Right, because you have to mold this person into like the societal ideal person, right? The child has to be kind, it has to be polite, she has to be on a path to some career. Like, it's so much pressure, and it's exhausting.
And it's bullshit, because guess what? When when my daughter got to be in her senior year of high school, like the second semester, the last semester, and, now it's like time to decide real fate situations, college and all that stuff. And I said to her, I am no longer your manager. I can't tell you what to do anymore. And then I told her, and guess what? I never had control of you. You just didn't know.
Yeah.
Like, I never was in control. I was like, I never, ever had control of anything that you were ever doing. You always had the choice. You just didn't realize you had the choice until now.
That's such an interesting perspective. It's so true too, because we're just trying to survive. Like, we're not trying to control everything. We're just trying to like have our child be happy and healthy, and like, just navigate the world in a way that's going to create good, And it's so much pressure all day, every day, for the rest of our lives.
Right. Forever.
Forever. I know.
Yes.
So true.
It's a lot. Like this whole mom thing. I mean, I still feel it, like when my daughter makes decisions that I disagree with, and, and quite honestly, she doesn't have to give a shit about me and my disagreement. But I still have those moments where I'm just like, I don't understand how she's choosing this. Like, and still reminding myself very regularly, because she's not you.
Yeah.
And she doesn't have to do what you would do. Like, but I'm still struggling to wrap my head around that.
That's a hard pill to swallow sometimes, because you see elements of you in your children, right? So you think because you see certain aspects of your personality, like you almost feel like, well, they're going to do the right thing. They're going to do what I would do, but they have sovereignty. They have their own choices, their own, like, independence. And this is who they are. Like, I have 3 daughters, and they're all so different from one another. Like, I don't even know where they came from sometimes. I'm like, like, I see my oldest daughter is very difficult. Like, I've always struggled with that relationship, but she's actually the most like me in a way. So that kind of makes sense. Like, we rub up against each other because we're so similar in certain ways. And the one who's least like me, like, there's no tension in our relationship. It's like very easy, like how you were describing with your daughter. But it's the same parents, the same household, so they're the ones who have their own DNA and their own sense of, their own self-determination, if you will.
Absolutely. How old is your oldest daughter?
So she just turned 13.
Oh, yes. This is
a teenager.
I remember, well, like, my daughter was easy, like I said, until 11. And then when she turned 11, that was when I started praying every day, please just let me like my daughter today.
Yes.
I mean, literally, that was my prayer. Like, I love her every day, but today, can I just like her? Because it was really hard. It was really hard. Like, when her hormones came online, and then, and so your daughter's in the space of, because every girl goes through this, particularly the one that's the most like you. But it's the queen bee stage.
Oh,
where
absolutely.
she's trying to say, I can be the queen of this hive. And that's when you then rise up and say, I'm sorry. There is no such thing as two queens in one hive.
Mm-hmm.
This
Yep.
this is my
That
hive. You wait until you get your own. Like
you you just totally nailed it. Like that's exactly how I feel. Like she sets up her whole like the whole house belongs to her. You know what I mean? Like everything is on her terms and I'm like, "You know what? No, I'm the mom. You know, like you
Yep.
don't get to boss me around. You don't get to claim every space in the house. You don't get to, it is really hard. It's funny. I took her clothing shopping yesterday and I put a Facebook post. I'm like, remind me next time I want to take my teenager shopping that I'd rather get a tooth extracted because that was so miserable. And I like didn't do anything except be like, okay, where do you want to go? And she was like chewing me out the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, awful.
I remember, and sometimes like my daughter will still, because she has a lot of me in her,
Hmm.
especially in the way that she expresses herself and everything. And so that's where we rub up against each other. I mean, we have a really good relationship, but we do rub up against each other, particularly when our ovaries are involved.
Yeah.
So that's a thing. But I really and I didn't know now, because now the things that some of the tools that I use for my own sanity are also the things that she says that she needs to talk to her therapist about. So,
Mm,
like, for example, like when she would have big emotions,
hmm.
at first I would get angry, like her emotions would annoy me. And
Yeah.
then I was reminded that the reason that they annoy me is because I can't do anything about them and they make me uncomfortable. And so
Ooh.
rather than shutting her down and telling her, don't cry, I would, if it got too big feeling for me, I would say, I understand you're having an emotion. Can you go and have it in your room? However,
Wow.
now she will say, sometimes she doesn't feel like she had their space for her feelings because I
Mm,
always sent her away. And so I now will say, like, I'm really sorry that you felt like that. I was really practicing self-love and trying to save both of our lives. Like I was
yeah.
trying to save us both by telling you, because I didn't want her to feel like she couldn't have the feelings. But
Yeah.
sometimes they would be, especially again, like her feelings would often coincide with my cycle because our cycles were so synced. So sometimes
Yeah.
I just could not do her feelings and my feelings simultaneously.
Well, that totally makes sense. I mean, you can't shoulder all of everybody else's
At
emotions, and
all.
especially somebody who you care for so deeply, and like you're affected by her energy and her emotions, and you're dealing with your own, and you're dealing with your own moodiness. Actually, you just really helped me. Like the way you just phrased that, I think I'm going to try that because I think that's like very acknowledging of her and what she's going through, but also taking care of yourself and prioritizing your self-care, which is I don't think a lot of moms do it enough.
Yes, I think that I had one friend, her name is Christy, and she now lives in Colorado, but she was like my one friend, and she had one daughter also. And she got it, when
Mm,
we would talk with each other about like the bigness of the moods and the feelings and stuff. And so, we would like bounce ideas off each other about how to deal with certain things. And, both of our daughters are now, like her daughter's a couple of years younger than my daughter, and they're both, adults now. But it wasn't easy at the time. But I
right.
think that like now that I'm on the other side, not that it ever ends, it's just different, at this
Right.
age.
Right.
But the one thing I can say that, and one thing I remind moms who have younger children, is that the best thing you can do, particularly for your daughters, is to model loving yourself. And even if
Mm,
that looks like boundary setting with them, because boundary
yeah.
setting with your kids, and because that's one of the things, when I hear people, I don't want to inhibit my child. Well, you know what? Fuck that. Your kid needs to learn boundaries, because if you don't teach them, like I know I have had experiences with friends or in relationships, even with people who never learned boundaries, who
Right.
think that they can just vomit all of their everything on you anytime. And that it's because their parents never said, like, okay, this is a line. So even when like my daughter's very mouthy, so I'm very mouthy. So she got that very honest from me. And I would
Mm-hmm.
just tell her, like, you know what? Sometimes you're midway arguing with your kid before you realize you're having an argument,
Yeah.
like you're like, wait a minute, what the fuck? Why am I having this conversation? But that would happen often where we would be like, before we've gone back and forth a couple of times, and then I'd have an epiphany, like, wait a minute. And I would say,
Mm,
you know what? That's a great place to put a period. Let's just
yeah.
not talk for a while. And she hated that. But again, I would tell her, I'm saving your life here. Because if you keep going, one of us is going to go to the point of no return if we keep going back and forth. And it's probably going to be me. And you would really hate to not be raised in the house with your mother because she went to jail because you wouldn't stop. So I would just say, like, that's a great place to put a period. And I still will say that to her. Like, let's not talk for a while. And then one of us, and a lot of times it's me, will come back and, sometimes I would go back and say to her, you know what? I just want you to know that this disagreement has nothing to do with how much I love you. Because I never wanted her to think that disagreeing means that someone doesn't love you anymore. It just means you don't get along about this thing. So I would always sometimes get all the way down to my room and go all the way back just to say that one thing. This has nothing to do with love. And even though right now you're probably saying, I hate my mom and she's such a fucking bitch.
Right.
This has nothing to do with love. And then I would retreat to my space and she would retreat to her space and then we'd be able to be okay.
I think what you just said is amazing because I feel like we're taught that we can't have any negative emotion related to our children, that we have to be selfless. We have to love every bit of them unconditionally, no matter what, like no matter how bitchy they are, no matter how abusive they can be, no matter what they say. And that's not true.
No,
and
it isn't.
You're absolutely right. Like modeling that, you know what, I'm not going to tolerate being abused is really important for them to know, even at the expense of, them being like it's a tough lesson for them when you like the worst thing I can do is say, I'm walking away now and I'm leaving you alone and I'm ignoring you because until you can speak to me nicely, that's the worst thing because they hate it. They hate being ignored, It
is. But like giving it, cause like I hate being ignored too. That's
Me
like,
too.
Cause my mother used silence that way. Again, she didn't know any better, but that was how she coped. She used silence and sometimes it would go on for days and I hated that. And so I don't do that. But if I do sometimes need the silence, but I will never silence without explaining why. Guess what? I'm gonna not talk for a while because I need to get myself together. You do the same. And then we'll come back together. And like me and my daughter have never gone days without speaking, and I cry all the time. So sometimes even me saying like, this is what you said that really hurt me as I'm sobbing, like, because I'm a cry.
Yeah.
I will say that, but I'm very good about like, because this is what I know for sure. And I think that this is what I've witnessed in a lot of like the parents that I know is because of that idea that we are not supposed to have negative emotions. They end up tolerating more than they should. And consequently, their children don't have respect for them. And respect is more important than love.
I agree. I totally agree with you. And the more that you can protect your own energetic space and your emotional space, the more that they will respect you.
Absolutely.
Because you're creating those boundaries. And then when you come back, everybody's calm. You can reconnect. You can like reaffirm your love for one another and like exactly what you just said, recognize like just because we're disagreeing or we're butting heads doesn't mean that there isn't a foundation of deep love there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But kudos to you because I'm one of 3 girls. I'm in the middle of the sister sandwich. And I only had that one daughter. So for the life of me, I cannot imagine how my mother managed.
I mean, I don't know how I'm managing. Sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm just kind of surviving. I'm just going through the motions. And then there are days where everything just feels completely right. You know what I mean? Like there are days like it's a cyclone in the house and everybody's rushing around and like my house is a total mess all the time. But then I sit back and I have this like mindful moment where I'm like, it's everything is as it should be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And everybody like this is the craziness and I'm going to miss it one day. And I have to remind myself of that because I'm going to be like, oh, I miss, whatever, picking up their toys, but like, just the sentiment of it and how quickly it goes by. And I'm sure you feel that way sometimes too, having a 23-year-old that I try, even though it's really hard sometimes, I try to love every second of it, as crazy as it gets, because I know very well that one day I'm going to miss it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
It goes so fast. It goes so fast. I mean, think about like, I'm sure you look at your oldest daughter and think like, I totally remember like them handing her to me the first time. And it seemed like it was like 5 minutes ago.
It does. And I remember talking with my husband and being like, I wonder what she's going to look like. I wonder what she's going to be like, you know? And now it's just, she's 13. I have a teenager.
Right?
I have a freaking teenager. It's crazy.
It goes so fast. So tell me, how are you navigating sexuality with your daughters?
It's a good question. So I'm very open. I'm like an open book. I'm a body image mentor. I'm really expressive sensually and sexually. And I kind of expected when I had daughters that I would be just easy navigating all this. But to the contrary, it's actually very hard because my oldest daughter is very private, very private. And my husband is actually, I'm very like open and gregarious and like talkative. And my husband is very private and very sort of quiet. And she kind of is a little bit like that. So when she was going through puberty, I was like, oh, honey, tell me about your boobs. Tell me about your period. And she'd be like, Mom, like, shut up, like, go away. Like, I don't want to talk about this. And like, I had to sort of insert myself because it's important to talk about it, whether or not they want to. I have an obligation to tell them about it. So with her, it was tough because it was very uncomfortable for her, which made me uncomfortable. But my other two are very open. And so I just talk about it as many times as I can and as many. So we went to go see Wicked, the movie Wicked. It was a show. And in the show, the main character apparently was born out of wedlock. The father had an affair and it was sort of portrayed in the show, but it was very vague, you know? And my daughter was like, how did they do that? Like, if they weren't married, how did they have a kid? You know? And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to have this whole conversation in the car. But we just talked about it. Like we talked about, you don't have to be married to be able to conceive a child. And this is what happens. And like making sure that they're respecting their bodies and that they have agency over who they are with intimately and who they're not. And we talked about consent and we talk about, if anybody makes you feel uncomfortable. So we're having the conversations. It's just not as easy as I thought it would be given my personality. You know what I mean?
Yes. How are you talking about pleasure?
So because I am also an eating psychology coach, so I talk about pleasure with food a lot because one of the ways. Pleasure is a very conflicted word in our society. Like there's a lot of negative connotations with it. Like, oh, you're gluttonous or, oh, you're hedonistic, you're indulging, all these words. And what I'm teaching them is no, like.
I love all those words, by the way. Go on.
I do too. I love them.
Yes, I am very hedonistic and indulging, all of the things. Yes. Me too. So I feel like there's so much denial in our culture. Like we deny ourselves of pleasurable food. We deny ourselves of sex. We deny ourselves of any kind of bodily pleasure. And obviously there's some reasons why, because there's like shame and like people go through puberty and have different experiences with it. But what I'm teaching them is that their body is a vessel of complete pleasure and pain too, but that we need to honor the whole spectrum of what our bodies can communicate to us, emotions, sensations, like all of it. And that it's not something to fear. It's not something to be ashamed of. But that, it's a beautiful honor and blessing that we get to experience pleasure in so many different ways and that we're allowed to tap into it. We have permission to tap into it. Absolutely. Look, I love you for that.
Thank you.
Because, like as women, no one talks about our pleasure. I was having a conversation recently with someone, I don't know who, but I was saying like, in all of my, I'm going to be 45 in September, but in all of my years, and I think I had my first visit to the gynecologist in 7th grade because I had a bladder infection, but I didn't have language. I knew the pain because it wasn't burning when I urinated. I was having like a pain. And when my mother asked me, where was it? I said in my ovaries, because that's the vicinity, which, of course, the bladder is right in front of it or whatever. But I didn't know at the time. So my mom took me to the gynecologist. Like, she's like, okay. So, but so that was my first experience. But in all of these years, I have never had a gynecologist talk to me about pleasure. Ever.
Me too. Now that I think back of it. So do you think that has to do with the cultural narrative, like that children shouldn't know about these things, or that they don't feel like they want to take the role of the parent away? Like, what do you think that is? Because
Well,
I had the same experience.
well, I mean, I understand why that particular visit, but like, how come I haven't had a conversation with pleasure with a gynecologist as a 40-year-old? You know
Right.
what I mean? Like, what's the excuse then? Like once I became a grown woman, like why wasn't that the only conversations are around? Like I had a partial hysterectomy years ago. And when
Oh.
she asked me, and if I had known what I know now about living in my body, I would have said no to that. But at
Mm.
the time when my gynecologist, and I felt very comfortable with her, but when she asked me if I wanted to keep my cervix,
Mhm.
she asked me if I wanted her to just take the whole thing. And I said, no, there's very pleasurable things that happen in the cervix.
Oh yeah, people have cervical
Right.
orgasms.
And I mean, it never occurred to her to be the one to tell me that, though, is my point.
Wow, that's so backwards. Like that doesn't make any
At
sense.
all. Like, why wasn't she saying, like, and at the time I was in my 30s. I was like 30. I was probably like 36. So fairly young to be having, my womb removed.
Yeah.
So even like that should have been what she should have been telling me. I mean, in addition to the fact that I was like, and it supports the pelvic floor and blah, 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 blah. And I was
Mhm.
thinking about like my not wanting my bladder to be coming out of my vagina. And like, you know what I mean? Like,
Right?
I mean, of course they suspend, but like those were the thoughts I was having about, but like my very first thought about keeping my cervix was pleasure.
Yeah.
Like, no, no,
Yeah.
no, no. There are nerves there.
Right. And they need to be talking about that more. Like
Right.
I don't know why pleasure is so diminished for women. Like if you think about how many studies have been done on men's sexuality and male orgasm versus female orgasm, it's such a disproportionate amount of time spent on teaching women to tap into their own pleasure principles and like on their body
Oh, they're
in
jealous.
general. They're jealous.
They're
Yeah.
jealous. We have the only organ on the human body that has no other purpose but pleasure.
Isn't that
Men
amazing?
don't have that.
That's amazing.
Even
That's so
even
true.
I mean think about even from when you think about how big that is from an evolutionary perspective, when you think about everybody, it's not like the penis wasn't born out of the same structure, it just grew differently, right? But
Right,
then how
right,
how come the head of the penis doesn't have 8,000 nerve endings?
right,
It doesn't. So they're
right. But
they're they're jealous. Like
and they're so jealous. And the truth is like we have the ability to experience pleasure in so many places on our bodies too.
absolutely. Well, and
And
then too, it's not like the nerves, they're not different nerves for pleasure and pain. They're the same ones.
right,
You know what I
right.
mean? Like it's the same nerve that can create pleasure, that can create pain. Like sensation is sensation. And I think that part of our resistance to pain is the way that pain is presented to us. It's the
Mhm.
narrative we were given because, I mean, think back to like when your daughters were young and
Mhm.
say they're like 2 and they walk into a wall, which, every toddler walks into a wall and they're like crying. They cry, they shake it out, and then they're finished with it. But the
Right,
narrative for the pleasure comes when the parent or an adult says, "Aw," as soon as they recognize, like maybe they feel the tenderness again and they
right.
point to it. And then the adult says, "Oh, it hurts." And then they re-experience the
Mhm.
pain all over again, which if we just said, "Oh yeah, you're fine."
Right. Shake it off.
Right. But we continue to feed the pain narrative because that's what we do when something hurts.
Yes. Yes, that's so true. And then we create stories around that experience that
Absolutely.
has us be even more fearful of pain in the future.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
sometimes even listening to myself, it's so funny. But I dramatize the pain of anything. Oh my God, I was so devastated. It's like, no, you weren't. Like, but
Yeah.
I do it all. I mean, I do it because I love words so much. But if from an energetic perspective, like it's like, but if we didn't have this whole, if even if we still had the pain narrative, what if we had the pleasure narrative? Because I also exaggerate pleasure. Like, oh my God, it was so delectable. It
I
was
do that too.
like I'm a cookie baker. So every time I tell someone, I'm like,
Mhm.
this is the best thing you'll put in your mouth. I promise.
Oh, I want one of your cookies.
And, and people are usually like, they immediately feel like they want to eat one. But if we gave pleasure that kind of narrative all
Yes.
the time,
Right.
rather than making it be this thing that's fleeting, because we act like pleasure is more fleeting than pain, but it isn't.
Right.
Pain goes away
No,
just as quickly.
yeah. And pleasure actually has the ability to linger.
Yes, it does.
And
As long as you
right?
breathe, right?
Yeah, right. And you know what? The thing that I think about when with the narratives and like with our relationship with pleasure and pain and so forth is that we tend to like numb out. Like we're all like in our heads all the time, and we're never fully dropping into our body experience. So like we have like sort of a warped experience of both of those. Like because of like with food, what I see with my clients is like they're not even really enjoying the pleasure of food because there's so much guilt surrounding it. Like, how is it going to show up on the scale? And what is it going to do to my body? And like, society says I shouldn't enjoy that brownie. And like, so like you can't even freaking enjoy a brownie because you're worried about what other people are going to think of you for eating it or yourself or like the consequences. And very similarly, I feel like sex, it's the same thing. Like a lot of women are in their heads during sex versus dropping into their bodies to fully experience, like, do I like this? Do I not like this? Where might it feel better? Where, like where can you explore? And a lot of women are like just totally circumventing that whole process and feel like kind of going on automation almost.
Absolutely. Well, then they wonder, like, why am I struggling with orgasm? And not to say that orgasm is the only indicator of pleasure. You can be in pleasure in the absence of orgasm. But like women who struggle usually also are suffering tremendously by debilitating self-consciousness. Well, no, you're not having an orgasm if you're thinking that he's wondering if your stomach is fat.
Right. Yes. Oh my gosh. So true.
Like you cannot be in self-consciousness and pleasure at the same time.
At the same time. No, you're right. They're two different circuit ways. Like you have to either drop into your body and fully agree to be there through the whole experience or you just go and, you navigate through your head and through your like consciousness. But it's not the same because then you almost like are directing your thoughts and then you're getting in your head about why you can't have an orgasm. And then you're like you just said, like worried about what they think about your body versus like, how does it feel to just be in your vessel, like be in your body, and sort of like let go and release and just allow yourself to receive pleasure as opposed to force it upon you.
Absolutely. Well, I think that again, like people that struggle with being with pleasure are also have a really hard time receiving in any capacity.
Yes.
They can't receive a gift. They can't receive a compliment. They can't receive anything. Like they can almost not receive an inhale because people that struggle with pleasure, particularly sexual pleasure, and people that struggle with receiving also have a tendency to hold their breaths all the time.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I lost my dad in September, and I was like in a massive stress response for months, right? And my husband and I took a trip to the Bahamas, and literally, the second I stepped in the hotel room and like was out on the beach, I felt like I exhaled for the first time, and that's when the vacation started because I finally I exhaled and I allowed myself to finally relax and to like let myself know that I can give myself permission to not be in a stress response anymore.
Yes.
And I can take that time to just like hedonism, like allow it to happen. And look, there's day in and day out stress, no matter what your life is about or what's going on. But like we have the efficacy to like get ourselves grounded and in a relaxation response if we let ourselves do it.
Absolutely. What was the grieving process like for you?
Was hell, like I was really close to my dad and, he was like my best friend and it was a shock. It wasn't expected and it's been really hard. I've been having like a lot of like existential angst and like, I feel very vulnerable, like who's going to be next. And like, nothing feels safe anymore. Like if I could lose my dad, like it can happen to anybody, anytime, anywhere. But that it's been about 7 months or 8 months now. So I'm in a much better place. But like those first few months were horrible. I was in anxiety. I was having panic attacks and just feeling very unstable, unmoored, and like I felt like I was floating. I didn't feel grounded at all. So, but it's so much better now because I've learned some tactics to like recognize when I'm in that stress response and to like do things to give myself pleasure, to say, okay, go get a massage, or like go take a walk, or go call your best friend, or, get a support system going, or eat something that you love. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes, yes. Because it is, like, I think, again, like the way that we witness emotion, because, that's a lot, that informs how we process it, is how we
Right.
saw it. And so much of it is, people talk about emotion as if it's like a thought process.
Yeah.
Not like
Yeah.
a physical experience.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a physical experience. Like emotions are a physical and they manifest physically through the nervous system. So yes,
Right.
you get anxiety because anxiety is like the nervous system saying, I am overloaded, it's too much. You know what I mean? Like, but we don't ever get explained and we don't witness it being like, we watch our parents hold back anger instead of experiencing anger and letting it and passing through anger. Instead, they hold it in, and so they carry it. We watch them hold back happiness. Like, I didn't see a lot of joy at my house. I mean, people laugh, but there was like, I don't remember anyone just like really letting themselves be with joy. And when I think about like the deaths I experienced as a child, I don't remember anybody. I mean, with the exception of like the people who get full of emotion at a funeral and can't, but then after those minutes, and it usually comes if there's a body viewing, usually that's when the emotion gets heightened. And then after that, everyone's holding it in again.
Yeah.
And so no one's like really like, I don't remember. Like my grandfather died a couple of years ago. And I remember like my dad calling me. I was sitting at the kitchen table writing my newsletter, incidentally. It was the day after my daughter's birthday. And I was writing this reflective, my daughter just turned whatever age she was. And my dad called me and said that my grandfather died. And when I was in shock for a second, and then I started to wail. And my daughter came downstairs, and she couldn't tell if I was laughing or crying because she had never heard that sound come out of me before.
It's like a guttural, like total, like giving yourself over to grief. I know that very well.
That was like a thing though. But then, what ended up happening, I ended up being the point person. So we got to my grandfather's body hadn't been removed yet, which was nice. He was still warm. We got to sit around him and stuff. But then like I immediately went into take care mode because my grandmother handed me insurance policies, and then I had to plan a funeral, which I'd never done before. So I didn't grieve. Like it was like probably a month before I remember waking up one morning and just feeling like lead.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't had a chance.
Well, it's like you go into action, you step into like I'm sure adrenaline and cortisol, all these different things that are just creating action in you. Like immediately you had to take action and do different things that you don't process. You don't have time to process it always, and that was hard for me too, because I was watching Game of Thrones with my husband when I got the call. And I remember like, I felt so, I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it. Like I had to have my husband sleep on top of me that night, that first night, because I felt like I was floating.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
That makes sense to me. That makes so much sense to me. Well,
I needed to be grounded,
I'm so glad that you said that, because in the last, like there's been two deaths in my close deaths recently for me. And one of them was one of my childhood friends, her mom, and she was kind of like a bonus mom, to the rest of us. And so I got to see her the week before she died. We knew she was dying, and I got to see her in the process of dying, which was so liberating, which we don't always get to do. So I felt very honored, because most people, we won't get to see them in the process of dying.
Right.
But I remember then the next week, my cousin died, like my grandmother's first cousin, and she has 5 children. And then I thought about, so lately I've been really thinking about, because I still have both of my parents. And so I've asked like several people, like, I wonder, when your parents are no longer on the same plane with you, if there's this feeling of not being grounded and rooted because your roots are now not there.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So when you said that, I get that, because I've been pondering that.
Yeah. And it's very strange. It really is strange. And then you're also worrying about the parent who's left. So like I went
Yes.
into like caring mode and like making sure my mom was okay. And, it was total role reversal. Like I was caring for her and holding space for her emotionally and all these different things. So yeah, I mean, those things do come up. The other thing that I wanted to mention was, this is so strange because because I was grieving so much, like I wondered, like, will I ever even want to have sex again? Will I even have
Mm.
orgasms again? Like all I feel is stress and anxiety and sadness. And I was crying all the time, but I started to have grief orgasms, which was
Mm-hmm.
so amazing and
Yes. Big,
crazy.
deep, big, deep,
Yes.
like probably exhausting though, too.
Yes. Yes. It was like totally cathartic, like whole
Yes.
body, physically, emotionally. But, and I don't recommend people having grief orgasms because I don't want people to feel grief. But wow, it's very powerful.
Well, I imagine it's emptying because death is really the emptying, It's
Yeah.
it's because it's the leaving of a vessel, so the emptying out of that of the physical body. So
Mm,
the everyone that's left has an emptying to do, which is what the grieving process is.
that's a brilliant way of describing that. I really like that.
I had just thought of it now, actually. If you hadn't said that, I had never had that thought before.
Write
So,
write it down. Put that in a newsletter. Like that's so true and so brilliant. And I never thought of it that way either. It is
but
like
yeah,
that.
I mean, when you think like with death, with grief, you go through all of the feelings,
Yeah.
every single one, because it really is like this emptying of the physical experience of that person, because
Hmm.
it's even though from a spiritual perspective we know that you never stop feeling them, but it's a very different feeling to know that you can no longer experience that person physically.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like,
Yeah.
have you ever had someone close to you move somewhere else?
Yes.
And like
Yes.
even if it's someone you didn't see them every day, but you can physically feel that their physical presence isn't close to you anymore.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And death is like that, like to the millionth power.
Yes. Yep. And it's totally unmooring in some ways. And like you feel them, like you feel their presence. They're part of you. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like I see
Mm-hmm.
my dad in me. I see my dad in my brother and my mom and not my mom, my kids. He's there, he's everywhere. But like, yeah, there's no physical contact anymore. I actually had a dream about him last night. So I feel like that's such a gift when I have dreams about him. I'm like, he's
Mm-hmm.
visiting
Mm-hmm.
me. You know what I mean? But yeah, it is kind of whole body experience in so many ways, and it's very cathartic, and it has you like question everything, like wow, you start to think about your own mortality, and you start to like, wow, if my dad was 83, so like wow, like we're really all getting older here. I was starting to have all these like existential, like, oh my gosh, like, but the really cool thing about it, if I can put anything and a good spin on it, is like I started to realize, wow, like time is so precious. We only get one life, and I'm gonna do the best that I can to experience everything that I can. I'm not gonna spend time hating my body. I'm not gonna spend time denying myself of pleasure. Why? Like because it's also fleeting, and we're gonna die, and we don't want any regrets.
Absolutely. Death is really intimate. I'm going to read something that I wrote after my friend's mom died. And I said that death is intimate. It asks that we put self-consciousness aside and get naked. Death coaxes expression from the expressionless. It beckons us to lean in close. It lures emotion out of hiding. It's an invitation to gather around and be present with vulnerability. Death stirs the past and shakes forgotten memories loose. Death zooms in and reframes perspective. It makes the unimportant obsolete. Death teaches accelerated courses in compassion, understanding, and forgiveness. The human experience is varied and vast, but death levels the field. Death is indiscriminate. Death cares not about race, gender, culture, or social status. It doesn't care whether you're gainfully employed or successful. It's not concerned with your net worth or your credit score. It accepts everyone as they are, healthy, sick, broke, rich. In any given moment, we are all in the process of dying. You're closer to death than you were at this moment than you were 5 minutes ago.
Oh my gosh, that is so beautiful. That is so beautiful. Can you send that to me?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I
think
really love that.
it's such an invitation. It's such an invitation to be present, because the truth is, we're both around the same age. So we're at the age where we're going to start saying goodbye more than we say hello.
I know.
And it, as painful as death is, every single time we're in the company of it, it's an invitation for us to remember to be here fully.
Yes. Yes. That's exactly how I experienced it, exactly like that. And those words were just so powerful and meaningful. I think you should post that everywhere because it's true. It's like we nobody can escape it, and it's all the same. We're all the same,
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so interesting because two of my grandparents, my mom's mom and my dad's father, both died at home, and both of them I was able to, see them immediately following death, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
As opposed to after they've been prepared.
Sure.
But like seeing them, because it like when I saw my grandmother, I remember looking at, and her eyes were open and her mouth was pursed like she had been talking.
Oh my goodness.
And there was like one tear that never rolled all the way down her face. It was like right in the corner of her eye. And so so it was like she was frozen. So I stared at her for the longest time. And I was saying like to my sister, I was like, everything about the way her face looks says that she's living, but she isn't.
Oh my goodness.
Because it was like frozen. It was like her face or her expression was frozen. And then I thought, like, I wonder if someone she knew came and got her. Like, what was she about to say? Because it looked like she was about to say something. And, like my grandfather looked like he had just finished exhaling. Like that's what his face looked like. Like, but we, we die on, we enter the world on an inhale, but we leave on an exhale.
Oh, that's so true. Oh my goodness.
We come into the world taking in the gift and we leave giving it back.
I love that. I love that so much. I'm like getting very emotional. Like, you're amazing. I love this perspective. And like the fact that, did you notice, like, did you feel their energy still? Like, could you feel?
Yes.
And any of their souls still there?
Yes. Well, mostly with my grandfather. And that's because I didn't have a connection with my grandmother the way that I did with my grandfather. But like I could feel him everywhere. And it's so interesting because when you talk about like your dad visiting you, my grandfather, especially at the beginning, would come to me in dreams or in meditation. So sometimes I'd be awake and he wouldn't talk to me. He wouldn't I would ask him questions and sometimes, and interesting, when I was in meditation, he would come to me in his 1970s form. Like, he was always wearing this denim suit and he had these long sideburns. He hadn't looked like that since I was a kid, but he would never talk to me. And then finally, one day I was meditating and I was like deep. I'd been meditating for like 30 or 40 minutes or something. And then here came my grandfather. And it was the first time I asked him, I said, is there anything that you want me to tell, my grandma? And he said to me, ask her about her knees, ask her about her right knee.
Oh so God.
I called her and I was like, me and my grandmother talk all the time. She's one of my favorite people to talk to. And so we were talking and then I said, Granny, how are your knees? And she said, it's funny you asked me. My knees have been bothering me so much. And my grandmother, my grandma's now 84. She never lays down. Like when she wakes up in the morning, she doesn't take naps or anything. She's up the whole day. So she said, my knees have been bothering me so bad. She was like, yesterday I actually laid down. I got in the bed early because they were bothering me. So I said, does one of your knees bother you more than the other? Because she never complains. And she said, it's funny you should say that because my right knee has been troubling me so bad. And I said, Grandma, I was like, guess what? I was like, I was meditating yesterday and Granddaddy told me to ask you about your knees. And he asked me about the right one. She was like, really? Because I had never asked her if one of them hurt more than the other.
Oh, and that's I have chills right now. I have chills.
It's the only time he's ever spoke. And I don't know, like I almost felt like I needed some kind of proof that I wasn't making it up.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And so I've seen him since. He hasn't talked since, but when my grandfather had an accident when he was in his probably mid 40s and he had pins in his hip. And so as he got older, they became uncomfortable. So he never liked walking a long way. So he was so happy when he finally got a handicap placard. So whenever we're like in the parking lot driving, trying to find a parking space, and my grandmother thought this was a joke at first. And I was like, Grandma, every time I need a parking space, I just ask Granddaddy to help me. And so at first she thought, yeah, whatever. Until one day she and I and my daughter were out and we were stopping for lunch and she forgot to bring her handicap thing. And I said, that's okay. We don't need that because Granddad always helps us to find a park. And so, I said it, and then here came this park like right in the front. And I was like, it happens every time. So I always tell anybody, like my older sister will be like, he never helps me. And I said, because you don't believe it. But I never have to, we always get a park in the front. Like sometimes I'll drive around twice and before I ask. And then I'll be like, all right, Granddad, can you please like hook us up? And
do your magic.
without fail, every time. In fact, one of my good friends, I told her that story and she lives in Philadelphia. And every time I talk to her, she's like, you know what? Your granddad is always hooking me up with parking spaces. I was like, I know, right?
I love that. That's amazing.
Because I think that we still have access. I think like that's one of the brilliant things. And this could either be really true or just smoke I've been blowing up my own ass for a long time. But I think that once someone transitions, we have then access to all of their brilliance in ways that we don't when they're in this physical space. Yeah. So even like when I'm writing, like if I'm really struggling, like if I want to write something for impact, then I'm feeling like I don't have words, then I will call on Maya Angelou because I'm like, Maya, you always were impactful. So that was like one of my first thoughts when Prince died, because I was like, I can't believe I live in a time where Michael Jackson and Prince don't exist in this space. But when Prince died, I was like, oh, but he was so prolific. So whenever I want to write something really sensual, he's the energy that I call on.
Oh, I love that. I love that. It's so funny. I just put a Facebook post about which celebrity death has been the most impactful or shocking or saddened, made you sad. And there was a whole like slew of different things, different people that came up. And it's like, we don't know these people, but they impact us in such deep ways. And I love that you're like tapping into their energy and their wisdom in a way that like fuels your own creativity and your own like, movements in the world. That's amazing.
Well, I mean, think about like the things that like your favorite things about your dad. Yeah. Like that now, like you can infuse all of those energies, those things that made you feel so close to him, even like the ways that he parented, the things that made you feel the most seen, like you can channel that with your own daughters.
Yeah. This conversation is so healing for me, just talking about this with you. I just want you to know this is really impacting me. Like I feel so buoyed by it.
I feel so grateful. I think we need to have conversations about death because that's one of the reasons that it's so hard for us is that nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And also like, people like, maybe they'll indulge a little bit, but I'm like such a sensitive and emotional person. Like I want to keep talking about it. And people are sort of like, okay, aren't you over it yet? Or you still want to talk about this? And it's like, well, and it's like just so lovely speaking with you about your experience and like these stories. Like it's very healing for me to hear all that.
Yeah, death is one of my favorite topics of conversation, actually.
other than sensuality and sexuality,
yes,
right?
Well, because like sex and food and sensuality, those are very intimate things, but death is very intimate. Even like when when I see signs when people are like, fuck cancer, I'm always like, you know what? Cancer is such an intimacy provider because when people get cancer, people get in close. Like last year on Christmas Eve, I think it was. I think it was Christmas Eve. No, it was Thanksgiving. We always volunteer for Thanksgiving. And on this particular Thanksgiving, nobody wanted to cook. So we had volunteered in the morning and then like my mom lives like a couple of hours away and she went home. And so we were like not knowing what we were going to eat on Thanksgiving. So we're at the grocery store and it's like, so nobody's in the grocery store. And so I was looking for something and I asked one of the guys who worked there, who was a manager, And he was like, well, let's find it or whatever. So he walks me over to the aisle. And so I said, well, are you going home to, eat after this? And he said, well, my wife didn't cook this year because she has cancer. And then he got so then I said, how are you feeling about that? How are you, because I was like, I know that everyone's rallying around and coming to her aid. And that's beautiful. And I was like, and I know you're trying to be a support system, but how are you doing? And so he starts telling me, and then he starts crying. And I said, and he was like, I'm just, she's got cancer and it's really hard. And I was like, but what an opportunity. And I was like, because think about like your wife couldn't cook dinner this year, but all of these family members brought food over. So he was like looking forward to going home because he still had this huge Thanksgiving meal waiting for him.
Oh,
and
wow.
I was like, because when cancer comes, as much as people hate it, people start showing up in ways that they haven't.
Yes.
They start having conversations. All of a sudden, they're saying all of the things that they never say, all of the love that they felt but never expressed. Like all of those things start coming out of people's mouths. They start showing up. They're calling, people they never call you. They're calling you now. They're checking on you. What do you need? How can I be there? I was like, so as horrible as it is to witness, someone you love going through it, at the same time, cancer invites you to get close.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I just love your perspective on everything. Like, because I don't think a lot of people see it that way, but it's so true. And, I also notice like people that you don't expect are going to be there for you
Yep.
And then people that you expect are going to be like the most healing and loving and whatever, sometimes disappoint you too.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's expectation, right? Like I'm still struggling with expectation. I'm really working on it because I've had some people close to me disappoint me recently. And I recognize that there's a couple of things. I watched a YouTube video and I can't even remember who it was because it was not someone I recognize. But what she said stuck with me is that people love at the level of their consciousness. And I'm reminding myself that what I am capable of and how I'm capable of showing up has so much to do with all of the excavating I've spent such a great amount of time doing. Mm-hmm. And most people haven't.
Mm-hmm.
And so my expectation of what support and love is supposed to look like is very skewed by what I am capable of doing.
Yeah.
So I'm not there yet. So I can't even give you any wisdom because I still am having a hard time not projecting my own expectation of me onto what I expect others to be and how I expect them to show up. I'm really still trying to navigate because I understand it logically.
Right.
But my attachment is still to the action that doesn't get taken.
Well, you said, you don't have wisdom about it, but you have so much wisdom because even just that path that you're on exudes wisdom and knowledge because of the path that you've been on and the way that you've had the self-discovery. And I mean, that so many people don't do that work,
I understand why they don't, though. I sometimes wish that I couldn't.
I know, me too. I totally hear you on that.
Well, I'm glad you said that. Like, what do you think about, like, because, so much of coaching and is about witnessing. And I don't know if and this again might be my projection, but I don't know if you can be a really impactful, like, self-help anything without having some kind of spiritual roots, whatever that looks like, whatever that interpretation is.
Yeah.
So what do you think about the way that spirituality is being played out on social media right now? Like, do you follow Danielle LaPorte?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's talk about that. Like, let's talk about it. Well, I had a hard time with that. Now, let me add, because in case, because do you identify as a white woman?
Yes.
Well, I don't assume, so that's what I'm asking. Well, I of course identify as a Black woman, so I'm going to say in advance that I did not agree with the way that some of the women who look like me behaved. I struggled with, and I have been a Danielle LaPorte follower for a long, I bought the Desire map when it was still $150. Like that's how far back, like I've been following her for a long time. And I'm not saying that clearly it was an oversight that there was no one on her team to say, this is probably not a good idea.
Right.
And for someone that isn't Black, I don't know if other people realize how colorism impacts us in the inner culture. For example, I'm in the middle in terms of what color I am. My daughter, on the other hand, is very dark. She's got this beautiful, velvety, rich, dark chocolate skin. Like she has like 90% cacao skin, like that I really dark. Whereas I'm on a super milky spectrum, like I'm going to be chocolate with a lot of milk added in, right? But that was a thing that came up a lot when like I remember being pregnant and I worked in a retail store at the time, and the woman who was the manager, I was an assistant. She was a darker woman from Detroit. And she had issues because her color had been used as a weapon against her. And so one of the things that she said to me was, she was like, "You gonna have a Black old baby," because my daughter's father is darker. And it had never occurred to me. Like I had never thought the thought. Like I'd never thought like, oh, I wonder what color my daughter, why would I think that thought?
Right.
And so my response to her was, I hope so. Because one of the things that was attractive to me about him was how dark his skin was.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, of course, my daughter is very dark. So I was very mindful because sometimes we would be out places when she was younger and some people would say to me like either, oh, her dad must be Black, must be dark, huh? Or they'd assume she wasn't my daughter.
I've heard that so many times. Excuse me.
Yes. So, but again, like if it would be easy for someone who doesn't grow up in this culture, in the Black culture, to like, how would Danielle Laporte know that putting dark skin next to the word lighter would be a thing?
I just feel like you should, I don't know. I just feel like it's an intuitive thing. I'm surprised that nobody caught it.
Well, I'm surprised. I'm surprised that nobody caught it too, because it's not just her by herself.
Right. She has a whole team of people.
So I'm not defending her, but I was very disappointed. Like I watched a video of a woman of color, and I think one of the first things out of her mouth was, "Fuck Danielle Laporte." That was bothersome to me. Because I don't because to me, I've never seen peace come out of anger.
Yes. I agree. And so it's complicated, right? Because I think that I could forgive the mistake and I could see others forgiving the mistake, but for not knowing, right? Because we don't assume there's malintent, right? But what was troubling to me was the apology.
Oh, yes. Yes. I agree with you. It wasn't an apology. Yeah. It was like, I'm sorry, but this is what you did.
Yeah. And saying that she was attacked and like that, okay, images are down, over, done with. But that's not taking a deeper look at how the harm was done and understanding why that was so harmful. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And I think that there probably has to be, she has to take a step back and do some deep examination and work and like hire women of color on her team and like to really dig into cultural appropriation and different ways that spirituality, is manifested by different cultures and different religions and to really take all of that into account so that it can be inclusive and it can be not do harm, because that's the least thing she wants to do. She doesn't want to cause harm.
Yes. But, I think there's so much work on both sides. There's, I am a Black woman who lives in California. So I do not know the struggle of what it's like to be a Black person in the middle of the country or to be a Black person in the South. I live in a very diverse environment. So racism here looks very different. And have I had racial experiences? Absolutely. But the truth of my experience as a Black woman growing up in California is that the majority of my experiences with white people have been good. That's my reality. Now, when it happens to me, I am shocked and appalled every single time. But, and at the same time, I also am very aware, like you become very aware when you are in very white spaces. Like I went out for a drink a couple of weeks ago in Orange County, which is very, very predominantly white. Mm-hmm. And I walk into this restaurant and I say to the guy, "You picked the whitest restaurant in the world." Like, and he looked shocked. And I said, he was a white guy. And I said, "Oh, you would not have known." Mm. Of course he didn't know. He didn't notice. How could he have noticed? Everyone looked like him. I was the only Black person in the space. So, so like there's this awareness that happens, but I'm also like very aware that if that's not your reality, that's not what you wouldn't notice. So like, I'm not
your purview.
Yeah. Exactly. So I'm not an activist. So like, this is the first time I've even been publicly even talked about this. Like, I'm not an activist in any capacity. And the reason for me is I feel like there are enough voices, and kudos to those people who are doing that work. I'm happy that they are doing that work. But I feel like I have the greatest impact by having conversations about race with the people that I know that do not look like me, who don't know any better. Mm-hmm. So I don't like, I had a conversation with someone who said, well, we are all the same and race is a social construct. And I said, I'm going to play the devil's homie here and tell you you're a white man. Yes, you can say that.
Right.
And he was like, well, I marched to the beat. And I was like, no. And then he went on to tell me how hard it's not easy being a white man right now, because we have to worry about what we're going to say and how we talk to women. And I was
Me too.
Right. I was like, please. Like, I'm sorry. I don't really give a shit about that.
It's really just being blind to one's own privilege, right? Yes. And I think that's what it really speaks of. It's not malintent. It's just complete unawareness. And that's why I'm so glad this conversation is happening. If at the very least it brings awareness to our own ways that we're privileged, that harms other people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we have to have the conversations. Like, there are people that they're like, I get really uncomfortable. And I'm like, well, I'm going to need for you to be with the discomfort. I had a conversation last summer with a couple. One of my friends and I were at the park. We were sitting at this bench, and this white couple came, and they meet at this same park on like every other Friday with a group of other couples. And that was the bench that they usually sit at. So they were telling us, I was like, well, we were happy to move because we were just sitting. We weren't eating or anything. So they were like, well, there's still time. And they invited us to stay. And so we were like having this conversation. But the husband was saying that he didn't enjoy the group as much. And the reason was because they have different perspectives on like race and politics. And so he's like, so we just don't talk about those things. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to call bullshit, because I was like, you're not being helpful by saying, when people tell me that they don't talk about race or they don't talk about religion and they don't talk about politics, I say, then you're an asshole. Because by not talking about it, you're not creating change, you're creating problem. Because one of the reasons these things have perpetuated for so long is because nobody wants to talk about them. But we cannot ignite change without dialogue. It is impossible.
I 100% agree. And like, we as humans, we avoid conflict, and we can't, we're so uncomfortable with confrontation and conflict that we just avoid it altogether. We don't even have the conversations because we just numb out and just like, oh, everything's fine and la la la, let's put our fingers in our ears and like not have these tough conversations, because I think there's a fear that people are going to fuck up, or that they're going to, their ignorance or they're going to say something wrong. And that's not an excuse not to have the conversation, because we all fuck up and we all make mistakes.
And we can say that at the beginning. Disclaimer, everyone's going to fuck up. Agreed? Say I, Exactly. And that was what I think that was like my disappointment with Danielle was her apology, because I thought even for this was an opportunity. Like she could have apologized, and then she could have handpicked a couple of those people who made comments that weren't ridiculously angry. Like the people, because I didn't read the thread on purpose, but I'm sure that there were people that had really good points that expressed it in a way that didn't feel as threatening, and that could have been an invitation. Let's hype on a Zoom call.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, that's what I would have done. Like, let's have a conversation. Can we hop on a Zoom call? Can you tell me in real terms what was wrong with what I did so that I can, because it's one thing to be like, oh my God, it was an oversight, but it's something else to say, like, let me have a dialogue with the person who was impacted by what I did.
Right. It's the difference between listening to understand versus listening to respond. And she was listening to respond, to protect herself, and to, like, I think she felt shame. I think she felt worried.
Oh yeah. Well, and they shamed her. Again, I didn't read the comments, but what I saw, I didn't read the comments on her post, but the posts that I saw by other people that were generated from that, I saw them shaming her. And that was what I had a conversation with a couple of other Black coaches, and that's what I told her. That's what we talked about. I was like, we cannot say that we're being spiritual when the weapon of choice we use is shame.
Yeah. And, to your point earlier, there's a woman named Layla Saad. Do you know her?
I've heard of her.
So she put in a lot of emotional labor in her response. As did a lot of other women that were, like, in the way that you're saying. It was very well crafted. She put a lot of time and effort and was very diplomatic in how she described the harm and the hurt that was caused. And then Danielle Laporte deleted the whole thread. And that's what got people really upset, was because it's like, you're trying to erase all this emotional labor that people have put into trying to have you understand and explain. And it's almost like, la, 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 I don't want to hear. I'm just going to move on and, like, put on a new image. But that's sort of missing the whole point. And I love this. I think that there should be, like, calls for, like, Zoom calls to,
absolutely,
like you're describing, so people can understand how to really not just not create harm, but actually take action to be an ally, and to take action to actually, lift people up and to be inclusive. It's the actions that are important. It's not just about, staying away so that if I don't say anything, I can't create harm.
Absolutely.
Right? That's one approach. But what people don't understand, and that I'm learning, and everybody I know is learning, is how to actually take one step in addition to that and actually learn how to take action for good.
Absolutely. Well, and I think, like, we could take a page from Brene Brown, and I'm probably going to mess this up really bad, but I heard her say it once, that when she's in shame, she doesn't call, she doesn't text, and she doesn't post. Because when you're in the midst of a shame shitstorm and you call or you text or you post, it looks like Danielle Laporte's apology.
Yes.
That's what it looks like, and again, like, back to our beginning conversation, like, when you're in shame, that's where you put a period. Yes. Or even if you don't feel comfortable, put a period, put a semicolon right there. You can come back and add on later, but you need to take a breath before you put your foot right down your own throat, because that's what ends up happening.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And it's like a shame spiral almost. It's like the shame upon the shame upon, and then you feel shameful for not addressing it. And then there's another level of shame, right? So then it's like you're digging yourself in this big hole, when actually, just like I call it, putting your head on audio, like, just describe what's going on for you and explain it to people.
Look, I'm feeling a lot of feelings. And this doesn't feel good to me. This was not my intention. I need time to process. I am not ignoring any of you.
Yeah.
Love, Danielle.
Love and light.
Right. That's what needed to happen. That's what needed to happen. It's unfortunate. I mean, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate because I'm sure the discomfort for her is very great. But I am so happy because this conversation around spirituality wasn't happening.
Right.
People were pointing out, like, I had heard stories about, Marianne Williamson, and I had heard stories about Gabrielle Bernstein and Mastin Kipp. I had heard stories about them, but nobody was really talking about it. And, unfortunately for Danielle, like she had not been in any of those that I know of anyways. She hadn't been one of those people that people pegged like that. But it took for her, her voice is so voluminous in the spiritual community. So it needed to be somebody who was revered in that way in order for the dialogue to really be impactful.
100%. And you're like, I'm totally resonating with what you're saying, because I feel bad about the whole situation, and I feel bad for her and what she's going through.
Absolutely.
But I'm so glad the conversation is finally coming to light. Yes. It's finally being talked about. The same thing with Me Too, the Me Too movement. I was so happy that we were finally talking about it, and all these like stones were being turned over, and all this muck and stuff was underneath that we can finally dredge up and like actually heal from, as opposed to just keeping it quiet.
Absolutely. You know what's concerning to me about Me Too, though? What's concerning to me now is that we already were a culture that pretended like sex wasn't a thing. And now we are a culture that's acknowledging that inappropriate sex is a thing, but we're still acting like sex is bad as a result of it.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
But sex isn't bad. Like, I was having I'm always having these conversations. I was having a conversation. I was having a conversation at a Korean bathhouse not long ago, and I'm standing in like the super icy water pool with a group of women who all were resisting getting in the water. But I was like, if you keep breathing instead of clenching and tightening everything, your body will adjust faster. So we're like standing there acting like the water isn't cold because everyone's breathing. And so one woman says, well, in San Francisco, there is a Russian bathhouse where it's co-ed. And I said, oh, I would love that. And one of the women said, oh, no, because then, you'd have to worry about like how the men are going to be. And I said, and how how we stop men from being, ridiculously inappropriately sexual? By normalizing sex. And I was like, because nudity is not innately sexual. It's just fucking nudity.
Right.
I was like, no one.
It's just a penis.
Right. I was like, if everyone grew up in homes where their parents were comfortable with their nudity, girls wouldn't gawk at penises and guys wouldn't drool over pussy. When you go to hedonism, the men are not walking around with hard-ons.
Right.
You know why? Because it's fucking normal to them.
Right. Exactly. There's no like forbidden fruit. It's all like right there.
Exactly. Yeah. So my concern is still that we still aren't normalizing the conversation about sex. We're normalizing the conversation about inappropriate sex.
That's you're just amazing to talk to, because that's an amazing perspective that I hadn't considered, that we're only talking about the ways that the sex can be harmful, and we're still not talking about all the pleasure that can be.
Right. As if life is sexually transmitted. How did even with in vitro, most of the population came the good old fashioned way.
Right. Right.
But we're still acting like nobody's fucking.
Right.
It's ridiculous. Like we have to normalize the conversation around sex and around pleasure. We have to talk about, the fact that a lot of the men that are inappropriate where sex is concerned, they don't have any concept of non-sexual touch, and most of them are suffering ridiculously from touch deprivation.
Yeah, that's such an important conversation to have too. Non-sexual, sensual touch.
Yes.
It's critical. It's absolutely critical that we have our boys and girls understand our bodily sensations and what intimacy is all about, and with other people and with ourselves. And I'm just grateful to you that you're out there having these conversations, and like this podcast and everything you're about. I'm so glad I met you. You're just amazing.
Well, I'm so glad that you said that, because I'm like in the middle of like a crisis about what the Sensuality Project is even going to be doing. Like, so it's funny. It's like right before this call, like I literally was saying, it's like, I don't even know Because as much as these conversations are needed, because we live in a culture that is so shamed, we live in this shame stigma-based culture around sex and sensuality and bodies being something more than just vehicles for pushing agendas, like people are really resistant to doing this work. Even though, like, I have conversations with people regularly who are talking about why, like, how their relationships don't feel how they want them to feel, or they're suffering, or they're not having sex. Or, I had a conversation with someone she was talking about not having sex or not having sex with her boyfriend. And I said, well, how does he respond when you ask for non-sexual touch? And she said, I never asked for non-sexual touch.
Oh, right.
And I said, oh, well, I guess since he feels like a piece of meat, he doesn't want to touch you. Because every time he touches you, he thinks that you need to be penetrated. And most of the time, women are the ones feeling like that. But in this situation, it's a man. And I was like, so no, he's resistant to touching you because he doesn't want to feel like he has to perform every time he touches you.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. That is like what I hear from so many of my married friends.
Yep.
Is that same thing, but in reverse. Like,
right.
I can't hug him because it's going to turn into like a whole thing and I'm too tired and I don't want to right now and blah, 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 blah. And it should never be about that. It should just be about, like connecting with your partner and like whatever, we'll see what happens. But like the intent is just connection and intimacy. And that can show up as just sensuality or just hugs or just cuddling. But there's always that like end result that has to be attached to everything instead of just enjoying in the moment what a connection with another person is all about.
But if no one ever is saying that.
Yeah.
No. And again, like boys are not taught that because they go through this long period of time where they're really not touched that much. Like probably when a boy gets to be about 9, people stop touching him. They're not hugging him. They're not kissing him that much. Then he goes through the puppy dog phase where he comes in and he always smells like a wet animal. And so nobody wants to touch him. And then he gets, and so then he becomes a teenager. And so the only time he's being touched is if he's having a relationship. And if he happens to be awkward and socially inept, he's not having relationships. So then he becomes an adult male who hasn't really been touched intimately since he was like 9. And so when he finally does get in an intimate, a potentially intimate position with someone, he really doesn't know how to do it.
Yeah, he's like a deer in a headlight.
Right.
Like, and that's one of the reasons, like, I always regretted not having a boy because I wanted to be that person who could mold a different type of model for masculinity. Like,
yes.
I wanted to be able to like hug and kiss and like say, cry as much as you want. And like all emotions are okay. And it's, and just, I wanted to like raise that really sensitive, like really woke man, you know what I mean?
Yes. I have 2 nephews. My older nephew, he's receptive to the conversations. So we do have conversations, and he was really comfortable with nudity because I was always nude when he came over my house. So he would, even as an adult, now he's 26, he will call me and say, I'm coming over and I'm bringing friends because that's like, have some clothes on. Like, so
that's hilarious.
Yeah, so I didn't have a son either, but I do have those like conversations. My younger nephew's 13 and he's just so not interested in any of that. But my older nephew, we do talk about it because it's so important. And again, like that's the conversation. I think that it's great. And I've been raped twice. So the Me Too movement, I am here for it. I'm grateful that women are feeling, and men, because there are men who have stories too, that people are feeling empowered to share their truth. But I also think that we now have an obligation, and if we're going to shift the culture, we have to shift it when children are young. Yeah. We have to normalize nudity. We have to normalize sex. We have to normalize non-sexual touch. Mm-hmm. We have to model what it looks like.
But I think that's why your voice and this podcast, this is what it's about. I mean, this is like the sensuality piece is all it's like all connected to that, and having those conversations. That's why this is so important. And I didn't see a lot of podcasts that touch on the things that you touch on. And that's why I was like, I want to be on your podcast, because
thank you for saying that. People were like, many people have asked me, why did I choose sensuality? And it was because like, I love sex. I love talking about sex. Sex is one of my favorite things about being a human. But I love all of the tools that this body came with so that I can experience this life. You know, I love smelling things. I love when I see something I've never seen before. You know, I love when I'm standing outside and the wind starts seducing my face. You know, like I love everything about living in this body and all of the sensations that come with it. And those are the things that allow me to enjoy sex.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Oh, I'm so happy you're saying this. And this is why, if you're questioning in any way, this is why you have to keep this topic going, because that's the foundation for which self-love can occur. This is what I tell people in my body image work, that you first have to get fully grounded in your body and be able to experience all the sensations that we're capable of and really appreciate that. That's the precursor to fully enjoying sex, is really understanding and receiving that type of those types of sensations.
Absolutely.
With food, with scent, with touch, with all of it. It's just so important. And like, I just kudos to you for everything that you're doing.
Well, I thank you for doing work around food that is about pleasure. Because when I hear someone say they can't eat or they shouldn't be eating this, you know, I always think like, you know, when you look at those water experiments, you know, where they're like, oh, this is the glass of water that had mean things said to it, and this is the glass that said, you know, like you see the difference, right, in the chemical structure of what the water turns into when you are, you know, hurling obscenities at it. Well, if that's true for water, you can do that with anything. Like people have done it with apples. Like we did it at my own house. We put, you know, 2 apples in a jar. And we said nice things to one of the jars and horrible things to the other jar. And of course, the horrible jar, you know, the apple decayed faster. But if it's true, then that means if the thing or the thought that you say before you put something in your mouth is, I shouldn't be eating this, then guess how your body's going to receive it? Like you shouldn't be eating it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes, like 100%. And your thoughts and beliefs and perceptions absolutely affect how you digest and assimilate nutrients.
Yes.
You were so on the same page on that.
You know, if you're eating like something really rich and decadent and it has a bazillion calories in it, and you say, my body is going to enjoy this and be fully nourished by it, guess what'll happen?
Yep.
It will.
Yeah. This is the work that I do. It's like affirmations and mantras and permission that you have agency. You have like the ability to let go of morality around pleasure. You have that ability. You just have to give yourself permission.
Yes. And be hedonistic. God damn, please. Please let it be luscious and delicious. Like all of the things.
We're begging you.
Yes, like it should be like, and again, like if you can be present in your body and you can trust it, that it is only going to take what it needs and that it will eliminate what it doesn't need, because that's what it's designed to do.
Right.
It will always give you exactly what you need. You don't even have to be like stressed about like, and I don't have a skinny past. No, not a single skinny memory. Because I've never been thin. I arrived at nearly 10 pounds. I was my mom's largest baby. I'm still her largest baby, by the way. You know, my older sister she was built like a brick house, you know, big titties, small waist, big ass. Like she was built like a brick house. And you know, she had 2 kids. So now she's not happy with her figure, but she's still, you know, pretty shapely. My younger sister is very petite, but I have never been thin. But when people see me now, even though at this age, I am the exact weight that I was when I was 9 months pregnant. But when people see me, they say, you lost weight. No, I didn't. My experience of my body changed. And so the shape of my body looks different.
I want to bottle this and like share it with every woman I know, because this is what it's about. It's about you loving. I hate that word loving, because it's like you don't have to be in love with your body. You just have to revere it, and you have to
Yes.
respect it and communicate with it. And that's the precursor of what love is, and respect. And that's how you get comfortable in your skin. And that's what shows beauty on the outside, is when you're feeling that confidence and you're embodied and you trust your body. Like, that's so powerful.
Yeah. So tell me, what's your right now, because it probably changes often. What's the best thing that you've put in your mouth lately?
Last night, I went to a vegan restaurant. And wait, what's the question? What's the best thing I had, or dessert?
Whatever felt good in your mouth. It doesn't matter.
Okay, so I'm a vegetarian, like almost vegan. I went to this vegan restaurant with a friend, and it was like a fettuccine alfredo, but made with like cashew cream, and it was sun-dried tomatoes, and
Mm.
it was like vegan chorizo and some asparagus. And oh my God, it was such a hit on my tongue of like different flavors and different
Yeah,
textures.
look, I am
And like,
imagining it, like salivating, just hearing it. I'm imagining all the flavors right now.
it was unbelievable, and I was so happy.
I am vegetarian also.
Oh my God.
You know why I'm not vegan yet? Is
Why?
because I love butter and cheese.
Cheese. I was just going to say that. Cheese is the deal breaker. And in fact, that's why I'm not vegan 100% too. Is I haven't given up cheese yet.
Yep,
It's hard. It's hard.
that's the only thing. Like everything else I can do without. Like I was probably born vegetarian, but I grew up in the clean your place house. You know, you got to eat
Mhm.
everything. And so I ate meat because it was required. And then as I got older, I just kind of phased it out. Like it wasn't like I didn't wake up like, oh, I'm not going to eat meat anymore. It was like, oh, I'm not buying chicken and I'm not buying beef. And then it was like, oh, I was buying turkey. It was getting frostbitten. And then the last thing I gave up was I was still eating. I was never a seafood person, so I never liked shellfish or anything, but I still ate tuna salad if it was made at my house, and I would eat salmon. And then because of my like because I would look at the fish and think this is the wrong color, like I stopped eating it. So like so it's been a couple of years now since I haven't eaten anything that had parents. But but I really love butter a lot, and I like cheese. And now I don't like fresh cheese as much, but I like it really old and stinky.
Me too. The stinkier, the better. Yeah. I
Yes.
think that's the only thing that I like stinky, though.
Me too. Me too. That's the only thing that smells like feet that I will eat.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I want you to be on my show. I have a live stream show. Will you
I'd
be a
love
guest
to.
on my show too?
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
love talking with you.
Yeah,
We've been talking for like 2 hours.
I know. I know.
Amazing.
Look, we're gonna this part we'll wrap up on. Yes, no, I'd love to. I would love to be on your show. I just love talking.
I know. I love it too. We're like the same. We're like two peas. I want to come visit you, hang out with you.
I know. What city do you live in?
I live in Boston.
Oh, you know what? I've never been to Boston. My mother went, was it last year? Yeah, my mother had just said, like, I really want to go to Boston. And then she and my dad went, my stepdad went. They loved it though.
Well, come visit me.
Yes,
Come visit.
I'd love to come to Boston. Yes.
It's amazing.
Yes, well, my mother said so. She was like, oh, I really loved it so much. I don't even know why she picked it. She didn't know anybody there. She was just like, we're going to Boston. And I was like, oh, okay.
Okay.
But
Sure.
she really, really enjoyed it. No, I'd love to share a meal with you.
I know, that would be so fun. Let's do that. Let's plan it.
Yes,
And
I saw your garden.
I'm gonna.
What are you growing now?
Oh, I haven't even started with that. I have a big garden in my back, but we've had such a cold spring that I don't even think we've had the final frost yet. So I haven't grown anything yet, but I'm going to do carrots and tomatoes. And I usually do some sort of bean, like edamame or some sort of string bean or something.
Like that sounds, I have dreams of gardening, but I'm still going to the farmer's market.
Hey, that's just as good. I mean, it's still the same idea that it's local, it's fresh, it's seasonal. You get to pick, with love what you're going to make, based on the ingredients. It's just all good.
Absolutely. I want to ask you one more thing before you go.
Sure.
When you're working with clients and they are presenting with physical ailments that have to do with, not necessarily the food that they're eating, but maybe the way that the way that their mind is perceiving themselves. Like how do you look, how am I trying to articulate this? Like, do you ever do menus for them, or is it just about like changing their perception or their experience of food?
It's a really good question, because people will come to me and they're like, just tell me what to eat. And it's like, well, I can't do that for you because I'm not you. And what the perfect diet for me might be completely different for you. And like, you have to take into consideration your family history, the conversations that were had around food as a child, your psychological, some stories that maybe need to be unlearned. You have to take into consideration like cultural, our food culture, our body mechanics, our like biochemistry. There's no way I can like create a perfect meal for you. But what I can do is have you tap into your own wisdom again, and to know exactly how to nourish yourself through trial and error.
Yes.
And what I can do is hold space for you and to support you to not be fearful of this process, but really to be inquisitive and curious about what are the foods that make you thrive and give you pleasure and which ones don't.
I love that. I love that, because your body knows exactly what it wants and what it needs, and it will tell you no about everything else.
Yes. And people are too scared because of our dieting culture. Like, we feel like we have to follow these rules, and if we don't do it, then there's going to be a problem, and we're totally afraid to just trust ourselves. And
Absolutely.
So that's what I do, is I help people trust themselves again.
I think that that's beautiful. I have found the older I get, and this came with it came with the awareness of like being fully embodied, is that like when I'm really struggling with something, like if I'm mulling something over back and forth in my head, so now my head is louder than my intuition because it never yells. It's my vagina that has the final say.
I love it.
I can feel something viscerally. Like if something is a yes, my vagina will like pulsate.
Twitch. It'll twitch.
Yes.
I totally know that. That's the intuition. That's the female intuition.
Yes.
It's in the clitoris.
Well, when you think about like for women, like if we were to like look at the chakra system, when they show it like on those graphics and stuff, they act like it's all like each energy panel is kind of equal almost, which I don't think is true. I think that for like if you are in a female identified body, I think that the energy systems, the energy fields are bigger in the spaces that we protrude. So like, I think that women, that's one of the reasons that women are deep feelers, is because our heart chakra is bigger because we have boobs.
Oh, wow.
And I think like those energy centers bulge in the places where we have the biggest, like a lot of women, even if you don't have like a juicy ass, it doesn't mean that your ass isn't wide. You know what I mean? And so like women, like I don't have a juicy ass, but I have a wide ass. But I have a tendency to really need to feel rooted and grounded because my root chakra is big.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's so interesting. I have to study up on that.
Well, and it's kind of like the gut, and where the center of our nerves is in the solar plexus, but that is, where a lot of people think that their intuition lives, but I don't think it does.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably different for every person, right?
Yeah. I think for men, it might sit more there.
Yeah.
But that also speaks to like for women, like men, their sexual organs are in the root, whereas for us, the interest to our sexual organs is in the roots, but our actual sexual organ is in the sacral chakra. But I think that because the testes and the penis is in the root, I think that that's the reason that men are so focused on money, because it's part of their foundation, whereas for women, it's not part of our foundation.
You're teaching me so much. Like, this has been such a rich, amazing conversation.
Thank you. I'm an information whore. Like,
I can't wait to talk to you more. Like, we have to stay in touch.
We absolutely do. Well, I am so grateful for you. I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing. I'm so grateful that you are giving people permission to enjoy their food. I love food so much.
Me too. Me too. Hallelujah to that.
Yes, I love food so much, and I
And
think that it's so like the work you're doing is so important.
thank you. Thank you so much. And ditto to you.
The Sensuality Project is produced, edited, and hosted by me. Music by bensound.com. The Sensuality Project podcast is a production of StaceyHerrera.com.